Is podcasting oversaturated? This is a question I get a lot as the founder of a podcast booking agency. One, there are so many podcasts out there. How do I know that there are good quality podcasts? And then two, if I'm thinking about starting my own podcast, why should I start it when there's already so many podcasts that are out there? I'm hopeful that in today's video, if you're watching on YouTube, in today's podcast episode, if you're listening, I can explain to you why podcasting is not oversaturated, why there are new shows waiting to be created that haven't been created before. But first off, I want to talk about podcasting in general. There's been a rise of podcasts within the last 4 to 5 years. When I got started back in 2015 hosting my own podcast, yes, there was podcasts out there, but not nearly as many as there are today. And back in 2015, there wasn't a ton of competition, whereas today there is a ton of competition when it comes to going out there and starting your own podcast. So, with that said, you have to make sure that when you're going out there and starting your own podcast, you're going to be in it for the long run. It's going to take 6 to 12 months to really even start to see some traction for your show unless you have pre-built an audience. Pre-built an audience means you have good website traffic coming to your site, you have a good email newsletter, you have a good social media presence. But if you don't have any of those and you just want to go out there and start your own podcast, it could take a little while for you to start to see results. So I think that's one aspect of it. Another one is people don't realize how much work goes into starting and running a podcast. It's not only prepping these episodes that I'd like to provide helpful content on, but I also feature a guest weekly. So I can't just have that guest on. I want to look at his background. I want to check out the previous podcast interviews that he's done. I want to make sure that I'm as well prepared as I possibly can be for these podcast interviews where I'm going to be bringing the guest onto my show. And of course, for the helpful content episodes as well. So I got to make sure that I'm prepared. It involves figuring out the content, involves booking the guest, involves research and due diligence, that involves actually recording the episode. And then when I'm not recording, then it's taking it, it's editing it, it's creating social media clips, it's splicing it up, it's making sure the sound quality is good. There's a lot that goes into it. And I don't think people realize how much really goes into creating just one podcast episode, let alone many different podcast episodes that are out there. All of that is to say, too many people start a podcast thinking it's going to be easy. You're going to see results right away. They don't see results right away. And then they realize how much time that it takes to do their podcast that eventually they just give up. I think there was some statistic, it was like 90% of podcasts don't make it past the 10th episode. So if you made it past the 10th episode on your podcast, congratulate yourself, give yourself a nice pat on the back, because a lot of the podcasts don't make it beyond the 90%. That's to say, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, you have to be consistent with your show. Are you going to produce every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every other week, 1 day a week, 1 day a month, whatever it may be? Stick to that schedule. For my preference, I would probably recommend not going further out than 1 month, preferably not going more than bi-weekly, because your audience is going to start to forget about you and you just want to have a regular cadence that they can follow. So you want to have that regular cadence. And then when it comes to the episodes that you're producing, what makes you different than the other companies that are out there? If you're a real estate investment company, what is different? Why should I invest 50,000 with you if you invest in multifamily over another multifamily company that I should invest 50,000 with? So that's what I like to think about on my podcast is we're a podcast booking agency, and there's a few of us out there in the last couple of years that have come, that have been created. But our specialty at our company is focusing on helping the real estate investment folks. So I want to only talk to folks in the real estate investment space. But I know I want to go a little deeper than that. if I'm going within the real estate space, what's going to make me different than the general real estate podcast? Maybe different than, say, your Bigger Pockets podcast or your other podcasts that are out there. For me, I wanted to take it from an LP lens, thinking of it from a limited partner lens. What information can I extract from this podcast host that, one, our podcast audience is going to find beneficial? And then two, how are they marketing their properties? Sometimes I might hop on an interview with an investor. They've been doing it 20 years. They have a list of 20,000 or 2,000 potential investors to invest with them anytime they get a deal. That's their marketing strategy. I don't need to dive deep into that. Maybe a newer company that's only been around a year or two. How are you finding new investors? Like, it's got to be difficult. People are very skeptical at this time and place to be investing their money. Why are they investing with you? What are the marketing? What's the marketing aspect that you're doing? So I like to bring in that marketing play to these podcast episodes, and that's where I try to make our podcast different than your general real estate podcast. So if you're thinking about going and starting a podcast, you got to think of it as, what can I do different? And it doesn't have to be a total 180 than what other podcasts are doing. But what can I do different on my podcast that's going to be a little bit different than the other podcasts that are out there? And that's really just what you want to think to yourself. And by doing that, you'll start to come up with ideas, and then you can start to make your show a little bit different. So someone can say, oh, this is not just your generic real estate podcast talking about the deals and what they've done. Yeah, I want to talk about that, but I want to dive a little bit deeper and ask them some more personal questions about their business. So, whereas I don't think the podcast market is oversaturated with good podcasts, it's oversaturated with bad podcasts that don't have a production schedule that's on time, that doesn't make it past the 10th episode, that thinks it's going to be easy to do it, doesn't understand the work involved with becoming a podcast. Because yes, there are a ton of podcasts, but there's only a few quality podcasts out there. And all you have to do is just be a good quality podcast, compound it over enough time, do the things I've been telling you about utilizing the guests that you have coming onto your show, about creating social media content. Eventually your podcast is going to gain traction and you're going to gain listenership. And then when you gain listenership, you build that connection with your audience, and then your audience does what you tell them to do. This could be signing up for your product or service. This could be investing with your company. Yeah, not everyone in your audience is going to do that, but there are being a select amount of people that do that, where now all of a sudden you have this income stream coming in that you never thought was possible. So at the end of the day, I don't think podcasts are oversaturated. I think you just got to go out there and create a good quality podcast.